Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Newsline at noon, as a three-day ceasefire holds in Gaza and Israeli ground forces stay out of the region, US Secretary of State John Kerry calls for a two-state solution. The US government condemns Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of women and calls on Tokyo to take responsible actions to make amends for its past wrongdoings. First, Pope Francis will meet with the families of the victims from April's ferry disaster during a papal mass in Seoul next week. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
It's noon Wednesday, August 6th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Ju.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. We begin in Gaza, where a 72-hour ceasefire that went into effect on Tuesday is holding.
Israel has withdrawn all of its ground forces, while delegates from both sides of the conflict are set to talk in Cairo, hoping to hammer out a more permanent end to hostilities. Connie Lee has more.
The gunfire has gone silent in the Gaza Strip as the 72-hour ceasefire continues. But the clock is ticking. With the truce set to expire Friday morning, Israeli and Palestinian officials have been sent to Cairo for talks, with Egypt acting as mediator. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, speaking to the BBC, urged both sides to negotiate a two-state solution. Meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, the three-day ceasefire is a brief window of opportunity for the residents to take in the devastation, stock up on supplies, and recover their dead.
We found destruction everywhere. A mosque, Quran books, decomposed children were found under the rubble after 5 days. Public buildings that used to serve people were destroyed.
UNICEF, the children's body of the United Nations, says more than 400 Palestinian children have been killed since the beginning of the conflict, with more than 140 schools damaged or destroyed in less than a month. Along with the truce, Israel said it has withdrawn all of its ground forces, but according to a military spokesperson, the troops are still on the border, ready in defensive positions.
We are taking a defensive stand. We are there in order to prevent further infiltration and further attacks from Gaza, originating from Gaza.
About a quarter of Gaza's population is now displaced, and more than 1,900 Palestinians have been killed in the month-long conflict. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
North Korea appears to be edging toward negotiating new arms deals with two Islamist terrorist groups, using Iran as a logistical link in the chain. The U.S.-based website 38 North raised the possibility this week, saying Pyongyang has a historical and possibly continuing arms relationship with non-state actors in the Middle East, namely Hamas and Hezbollah. The report states Hamas may have to restock their weaponry, as the group has apparently fired more than 3,000 rockets into Israel during the current conflict. British daily The Telegraph has also reported that Hamas is negotiating a new arms deal with North Korea. Weapons the two groups could buy from North Korea include AK-47s and ammunition, artillery shells, rocket-propelled grenades, anti-tank missiles, and surface-to-surface missiles. The UN Security Council has issued a fresh warning to the North Korean regime. More ballistic missile tests will be met with harsh consequences. In a meeting Tuesday, Council members denounced the recent launches and reminded Pyongyang that they were in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. While they didn't specify what measures would be taken if North Korea continues to flout its international commitments, they did raise the possibility of further sanctions. North Korea has test-fired short-range ballistic missiles on 7 different occasions this year. Now, there's nothing new about North Korea's provocative rhetoric and military actions, but the regime has taken a turn in recent months, becoming even more confrontational. Former North Korea specialist for the U.S. State Department Joel Witt told Arirang TV there are a number of reasons why. UDN has this report.
North Korea has recently been even more belligerent than usual, threatening to launch a nuclear attack on the White House and South Korea's presidential office of Cheongwade. Joel Witt, an editor of 38 North run by Johns Hopkins University, says a number of developments are prompting North Korea's actions.
There's, first of all, those North Korean threats. Secondly, there is what appears to be a deterioration in North-South relations. Third, you have the upcoming U.S.-South Korean exercises. And fourth, you have the Asian Games coming up as well. So all of these factors are in the mix, and the danger is the situation will deteriorate before the Games and result in some sort of provocation.
Seoul and Washington are scheduled to hold 2 weeks of joint military exercises in mid-August that are designed to bolster joint defenses against North Korea. When asked about Seoul's growing relationship with Beijing on the heels of a bilateral summit last month, Witt said it hasn't had much of an effect on Pyongyang's stance.
Chinese are still steering a middle course in dealing with North Korea, and they're not particularly supportive of either the United States or South Korea's stance towards North Korea. So I don't see any big changes coming out of that summit.
China's position on North Korea may not have changed much, but Witt says Washington should alter its stance towards Pyongyang, citing a lack of any meaningful breakthroughs in U.S.-North relations despite years of efforts. Witt called for a new tact.
A new policy has to include diplomacy, such as engagement, but it also should include measures such as sanctions or even military steps to protect ourselves, because this is a very dangerous situation, so we need to use all of the above in dealing with North.
유리안 아리랑 뉴스.
Now, breaking a period of silence on the matter, the United States has branded Japan's wartime practice of sexually enslaving thousands upon thousands of women a clear and serious violation of human rights. The State Department says Tokyo needs to do more to resolve the issue so that it can improve its relations with its neighbours. Our Shin Se-min reports.
The United States is urging Japan to resolve the issue of its wartime system of sex slavery and take responsibility for its past atrocities.
We encourage Japan to continue to address this issue in a manner that promotes healing and facilitates better relations with neighboring states.
The State Department confirmed a report on Tuesday that White House and State Department representatives held closed-door interviews with Lee Ok-sun and Kang Il-chul, two Korean victims of Japan's sex slavery system, to discuss their experiences. Emphasizing that it wasn't the first face-to-face meeting between the women and U.S. officials, the spokesperson said Washington was open to holding similar meetings again in the future.
It is deplorable and clearly a grave human rights violation of enormous proportions that the Japanese military was involved in the trafficking of women for sexual purposes in the 1930s and 1940s.
Citing a spokesman at the U.S. National Safety Council, Korea's Yonhap News Agency also reports the two women met with the officials from the White House Office of Public Engagement. However, the names of the officials who met with the women have not been disclosed. Lee Ok-sun and Kang Il-chul are currently traveling around the U.S., taking part in memorial events remembering the victims of Japan's historical wrongdoings. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, health authorities across the globe continue to scramble to stop the deadly spread of the Ebola virus in West Africa. Concerns of a greater global outbreak are growing, and to address them, the UN Health Agency is convening a two-day emergency meeting. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
The World Health Organization will convene a two-day meeting of its emergency committee starting Wednesday. A spokesman for the UN Health Agency said the main focus for the experts taking part will be the Ebola outbreak in West Africa and whether it constitutes a public health emergency of international concern. If they determine it does, the committee will recommend that the Director General of the WHO declare it as such, and that temporary measures are put in place to keep the virus from spreading internationally. The agency is scheduled to hold a press conference on Friday Geneva time on the outcome of the meeting. More than 1,600 have been infected in the current outbreak, and the death toll stands at 887. In the meantime, Spain is repatriating an elderly Ebola-infected Spanish priest who had been working in Liberia. An Air Force plane will pick up Miguel Pajares and bring him back to Spain for treatment. Pajares, who has worked in Liberia for over 50 years, has been in quarantine at a hospital in the capital. Meanwhile, a second American victim arrived on U.S. soil on Tuesday. Nancy Wright-Bull was flown in from Africa overnight and will be treated in the same isolation unit as Dr. Kemp Brantley, who also contracted the virus in Liberia. Both Wright-Bull and Brantley are reportedly recovering after taking experimental drugs. That is some of the world's leading Ebola specialists calling on the World Health Organization to make the experimental drugs available to victims in West Africa. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, with the outbreak of the Ebola virus front and centre of most headlines in recent days, concerns infectious diseases could spread to other parts of the world are naturally on the rise. Our Guansua gives us a rundown of which diseases in particular to watch out for before embarking on a trip.
No matter how slim you think your chances are of contracting a dangerous disease, prevention is always better than cure. As the world becomes smaller and people travel more, chances grow that diseases will be carried around the world. It's not only people traveling to remote regions that fall ill, even people who never leave the country can pick up some nasty diseases as there are more and more people catching contagious diseases in Korea. In fact, according to the Ministry of Health and Welfare and the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the number of measles patients stands at 410 this year as of the middle of last month. That's nearly 4 times more than the number recorded over the whole of last year. What's noteworthy is that only 14 of the 410 patients came down with measles abroad. Over 350, the vast majority, caught it as a secondary infection in Korea. This is why taking the required vaccinations and medicine is so important. The most serious and contagious diseases are commonly found in Africa, the Americas, and Asia. The yellow fever vaccination is mandatory if traveling to any country affected by the viral disease, while all the others on the list are recommended. Malaria, for example, which is mainly transmitted by mosquitoes, can be prevented by taking anti-malaria tablets before, during, and after trips to affected areas. Unfortunately, there are still diseases that have no method of prevention, as can be seen in the recent outbreak of the Ebola virus in Africa. The same is also true for dengue fever. The Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says basic methods such as washing hands thoroughly, eating cooked food, wearing long sleeves, and staying away from animals will give travelers the best chance of avoiding getting sick. Kwon-soa, Arirang News.
Stay up to date on the latest news out of Korea, connecting to our team of reporters about the issues that matter to Korea. On air, on your mobile, online. Find out more about Korea on Newsline at Noon with Mark Broom and Jin-ju.
I'm Jin-ju.
Market researcher, strategy analytics, said Thursday that LG Electronics brought in about...
Korea is very excited to welcome Pope Francis to the country next week. The Pope will be in Korea for a 5-day visit on what will be his first trip to Asia as pontiff. It might be a short trip, but the leader of the Catholic Church will be keeping a very tight schedule. Im Yoon-hee gives us a rundown on the Pope's itinerary.
This will be Pope Francis' first visit to Asia since his inauguration as pontiff in February 2013. Upon his arrival on Thursday, the Pope is set to meet with President Park Geun-hye. As for the rest of his schedule, he'll take part in a celebratory mass in Daejeon, where he'll meet with around 20 youth representatives from 17 Asian countries. He will also attend the beatification mass of 124 Korean martyrs, who lost their lives mostly during the 19th century under severe religious persecution. The mass will be the largest event during the Pope's visit to Korea, held at Gwanghwamun Square in central Seoul, with nearly 1,900 priests and some 200,000 Catholic faithfuls attending. The pontiff will meet with the Asian bishops in Hemi, located in the country's southwest region, followed by a concluding mass for the 6th Asian Youth Day. And Pope Francis is wrapping up his visit with a mass for peace and reconciliation in Seoul, inviting nearly 1,000 people, including former victims of Japan's wartime sexual enslavement during the early 20th century. The preparatory committee for this visit says he will also meet bereaved families and victims of the April ferry disaster upon the requests of the bereaved families.
We delivered the message immediately to Rome and received a positive response. We will be inviting families of the victims to a mass held on August 15th.
The Pope is expected to give words of peace and healing, not only to the bereaved families, but the entire nation as well. Im Yoon-hee, Arirang News.
Seoul's police chief has been tapped as the new head of the National Police Agency. The 7-member National Police Commission approved the government's recommendation of Kang Shin-myung this morning and put him forward as a single candidate to President Park Geun-hye. Now, the nomination comes after former police chief Lee Sung-han resigned on Tuesday for failing to promptly identify the body of the fugitive owner of the sunken Seodo ferry, Yoo Byung-eun. Now, he wasn't the only one to go. The chief of the army, General Kwon Oh-sung, also stepped down to take responsibility for his failure to adequately deal with the death of a young conscript who was bullied to death by senior soldiers. Now, the latest series of army bullying scandals in Korea has prompted a growing emphasis on the mental health of soldiers. A new study conducted by the Armed Forces Medical Command sheds some disconcerting light on the matter. It shows that from 2011 to 2013, more than 19,000 soldiers visited Army hospitals due to mental and behavioral disorders. More than 2,000 of them were diagnosed with anxiety disorders and had trouble carrying out normal everyday tasks. Those diagnosed with panic disorders went up nearly 50% over the cited period, prompting calls for immediate countermeasures to address the problem.
Now to some pretty huge news in the tech world, because Samsung Electronics and Apple have decided to withdraw all ongoing patent lawsuits outside of the United States. In a joint statement that was released about an hour or so ago, the two smartphone giants said the decision will apply to court proceedings in countries like Australia, Germany, Italy, Japan, Britain and Korea. The move is expected to save both companies millions of dollars in legal fees. The statement also said the agreement has nothing to do with any licensing arrangements, and the two will continue with their lawsuits in the United States. Now, Samsung Electronics has knocked its rival Apple off its perch in the highly competitive North American smartphone market, thanks largely to robust sales of its latest flagship smartphone, the Galaxy S5. Market research firm Strategy Analytics says Samsung's share in the market came to 36.2% in the second quarter. Apple dropped to second place at 28%. Now, industry watchers say the turnaround came as Samsung strengthened its sales with the Galaxy 5S, while Apple loyalists held back on purchasing new devices as a new iPhone, the iPhone 6, is expected to be released later this year, in the fall perhaps. Korea's LG Electronics also posted a record market share of 12% over the cited period to rank in third in the region. Now, China is Korea's largest trading partner, which is why the recent slowdown we've seen in exports to China from Korea is setting off some alarm bells here in Korea. While the country's exporters are enjoying some support, it seems, through a rather unlikely source, though: Korean TV shows. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
The rate of increase in Korea's exports to China is slowing as local Chinese companies are producing cheaper products. Up until now, a majority of Korean exports to China were in the form of intermediate trade, goods in which the finished product is reprocessed and consumed in the import country. Steel, machinery, and petrochemicals fall in that category. It's why local media outlets in Korea have emphasized the need to diversify the country's exports to shift the focus toward consumer goods or products that can be purchased for use by the average Chinese consumer. Korean exporters have found an ally in its TV dramas. Food products, cosmetics, and beauty products from Korea have enjoyed increased demand in China thanks to the popularity there of Korean shows like You Who Came from the Stars and The Inheritors. The Korea International Trade Association says consumer goods to China from January to May this year increased more than 9% compared to the same period last year. Exports of seasoned dry seaweed or kim in Korean increased 300% in the first quarter after protagonists in Korean TV dramas were shown eating them. Likewise, exports of canned tuna increased 12-fold and Korean beer by 67% in the first quarter on year, promising signs for Korean industries who are trying to survive in the increasingly competitive global market. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
And time now for a look through some of the other international headlines for falling on this Wednesday. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim standing by at the news center.
Eunice, a surprising and very sad development in Afghanistan because a two-star American general has been killed in an audacious attack at a training facility there.
Right, Mark. He's been identified as General Harold J. Green, a 34-year veteran who was making rounds at the military training facility in Kabul when a man in Afghan army uniform suddenly opened fire. General Green was the Deputy Commander General for the Combined Security Transition Command and the most senior American officer to now die in Afghanistan since the events of 9/11. 15 others were reported wounded, many seriously, according to a Pentagon spokesman. Among the hurt were a German general, 2 Afghan generals, as well as local and American troops. A spokesman for Afghanistan's defense ministry said the shooter was shot and killed, but offered no motive for the strike. The suspected insider attack left soldiers tense, as you can imagine, and underlined the challenges still remaining in preparing Afghanistan for Western troop withdrawals. Ukrainian forces are closing in on the rebel-held stronghold of Donetsk, but the heavy fighting is triggering a warning by the UN that a massive exodus and destruction could be ahead. At least 2 civilians were killed in heavy clashes on Tuesday as explosions sent residents scurrying underground to bomb shelters. Dozens of cars were seen leaving the industrial hub as well. It was not immediately clear who was responsible for the bombing. Rebels accused Kiev's forces for the campaign against Donetsk, while Kiev has denied using firepower against residential neighborhoods. U.S. President Barack Obama has pledged a substantial package of investments to the continent of Africa, amounting to some $33 billion. The announcement came as Washington hosts the first U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, attended by nearly 50 African heads of state. President Obama said the U.S. was committed to be a partner in Africa's success. A bulk of the commitments come from private sector companies like Coca-Cola and General Electric. The U.S. leader also urged his African counterparts to create an environment favorable for business growth, including government reforms and bolstering the rule of law. Africa is home to 6 of the world's fastest-growing economies and an expanding middle class. And finally, a 41-year-old convicted sex offender was arrested and charged for possession and promotion of child porn in the U.S. This after Google scanned his Gmail account and alerted authorities. Houston police said the online company had notified the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children after detecting explicit pictures of a young girl in an email he sent. But Google explained it uses special technology that attaches a digital fingerprint to such images of children, enabling its systems to identify them. It says no other criminal activity is targeted with this technology. U.S. federal law does require entities to report child exploitation when it is spotted, but this development is raising privacy concerns.
Good afternoon. Well, we are in for another sticky day today. The northern provinces will have showers until the late afternoon, while the southern provinces will have just spotty showers in the afternoon hours. And it will be scorching hot though, with highs hovering in the low to mid 30s in the southern provinces where the heat wave advisory is still in place. But the high in Seoul will remain below 30 degrees Celsius, rising to 29 this afternoon. But Daegu will soar to 34, and Gwangju and Busan will reach 32 and 30 respectively. And for other regions, it looks like Jeju Island and Daejeon will top out at 30, and Dokdo should see a high of 28 this afternoon. Now, Super Typhoon Halong is making its way to north, and it's forecast to shift direction toward Japan and to approach to Kyushu this weekend. But since this typhoon is going to be very strong and powerful, it should have an indirect effect on Jeju and the southern coastal areas starting Friday. So if you plan to spend your weekend in Jeju or the southern coastal regions, please keep a close eye on the path of typhoon. Well, that's all from me at this hour, and let's send it back to Mark and Jinju in the studio.
Well, thank you, Jian, for that report. And those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Yes, Jinju and I will be back at the same time on Thursday. Until then, goodbye.